Now that we know how to estimate energy needs, we need to know how to divide those calories among carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And that's where the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, or AMDR, fits in. These are the ranges that represent the percentage of total energy intake that should come from each macronutrient. And they're designed to reduce the risk of chronic disease while ensuring essential nutrient intake. For carbohydrates, the AMDR is set at 45 to 65% of total calories. This is a wide range, but it reflects how central carbohydrates are as an energy source. Carbohydrates fuel the brain, support activity, and provide fiber. For fat, the range is 20 to 35%. Dietary fat is needed for absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, regulating hormones, as well as supporting cell membrane function. Although fat once had a bad reputation, we now know that the type and distribution of fat matter more than simply the quantity. And protein falls in the range of 10 to 35% of total calories. This flexibility allows us to adjust for different needs, from maintenance in healthy individuals to increased requirements during illness, growth, or recovery. Protein provides the amino acids needed for muscle repair, immune function, enzymes, and more. Once we calculate a person's total energy needs, usually based on ideal body weight or measured caloric expenditure, we can use the AMDR to determine how many calories and ultimately how many grams should come from each macronutrient. This involves percent and dimensional analysis, the very two skills we emphasize here at Bridge. So, without further ado, let's try a practice problem. During a diet recall, a dietitian determines that a patient eats approximately 350 grams of carbohydrates, 105 grams of protein, and 41 grams of fat. Does this patient meet the AMDR recommendations for each macronutrient? Remember the ranges, try to convert each macronutrient to calories, and I'll be right here to go through it with you. So the AMDR ranges, the recommendations for carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are 45 to 65% for carbohydrates, 20 to 35% for fats, and 10 to 35% for proteins. So why don't we start with our grams of carbohydrate? We have 350 grams of carbohydrate, and we need to figure out how many calories that is, because remember, this is a percent of total caloric intake. So in order to figure out the percents, we need to take the amount of grams and figure out how many calories that is. So this patient is eating 350 grams of carbohydrate. Do you remember how many calories are in 1 gram of carbohydrate? There are 4 calories in every 1 gram of carbohydrate, and this is an equivalent statement. The equivalent statement for carbohydrates says that there's 4 kcals from every 1 gram of carbohydrate. Carbohydrates and proteins are both 4 calories per 1 gram. But you'll remember dextrose from TPN is only 3.4 calories per gram. Fats are 9 calories per gram, and alcohol is 7 calories per gram. So if this patient is eating 350 grams of carbohydrates, that's 1,400 kilocalories from carbohydrates. They're also taking in 105 grams of protein. And so we'll convert our 105 grams of protein into calories using the same equivalent statement. It's handy that protein and carbohydrates have the same equivalent statement. So if they're taking in 105 grams of protein, that's 420 calories of protein. And this person is taking in 41 grams of fat. We need to remember that fat is the most energy-dense macronutrient with 9 calories per 1 gram of fat. So if they're taking in 41 grams of fat, then they're taking in 369 calories from fat. So in total, we find out that their total energy intake is 2,189 calories. And we need to compare this to the AMDR ranges. Carbohydrates is 45 to 65% of total calories. So they're taking in 1,400 kilocalories from carbohydrates out of 2,189. This is a straight percent calculation. Specific outcomes, 1,400 carbohydrate calories divided by total outcomes, 2,189 calories, is 63.9%, which just squeaks in under the 65% mark. We'll do this again for protein. They're taking in 420 calories from protein divided by our total calories, which is just outside the range of 19.1. That's why this one is red. And we'll do the same thing for fats. And we find out it's 16.8% fat which falls between 10 and 35%. Now, let's look at the micronutrients. The dietary reference intakes, or DRIs, are a set of 4 values that help us determine whether someone is getting enough or possibly too much of a vitamin or mineral. If there's one to know, it's the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. The RDA is the average daily intake that is sufficient to meet the nutrient needs of nearly all healthy individuals. It's based on strong scientific evidence and the target intake we usually aim for in both individual counseling and population guidance. The estimated average requirement, or EAR, is a lower threshold. It's the intake that meets the needs of only half of the healthy population. EAR is used more often in research and policy to assess nutrient adequacy across groups. The adequate intake, or AI, is used when there is not enough evidence to establish an RDA. It's based on what healthy people typically eat, and it's considered a safe estimate. AI is like an informed guess. Then we have the tolerable upper intake level, or UL. It's the maximum daily intake unlikely to cause harm. It tells us the ceiling for safe intake. Going above this level could lead to adverse effects, so it's the upper limit of what is safe. And we can represent most of these DRIs graphically. In our last lesson, we used the bell curve to understand normal distributions, averages, and standard deviation in data analysis. But we can apply normal distributions to lots of nutritional data, including the DRIs. At the center of the bell curve is the estimated average requirement, or EAR. This is the intake level that meets the needs of 50% of healthy individuals in a specific age and sex group. About 2 standard deviations above the EAR is the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA. This level meets the needs of nearly all healthy individuals, about 95% of the population. The RDA gives us confidence that intake is adequate for almost everybody. But to understand safety, we need to graph level of intake against risk of inadequacy versus risk of adverse effect. When there is 50% risk of inadequacy, that's the EAR. And the RDA is very close to 0% risk of inadequacy since it covers 2 standard deviations of the healthy population. But as intake rises beyond adequacy, we eventually reach the tolerable upper intake level, or UL. This is the highest daily intake unlikely to cause harmful effects. Beyond the UL, risk of toxicity or adverse outcomes increases. Adequate intake, or AI, is different because AI is used when there's not enough evidence to establish an EAR or RDA. Because it's not statistically derived, it doesn't fit neatly on the bell curve. So we'll end our discussion of needs with daily value, or DV, which is the nutrition number most familiar to the general public. You'll find it on every nutrition facts label in the grocery store. The daily value tells us how much of a particular nutrient is in one serving of food in the context of a 2,000 calorie diet. It's meant to be simple, standardized, and consumer friendly. Unlike the DRIs, which are based on age, sex, and life stage, the daily value uses one generalized target to make food labeling easy to understand. For example, if a granola bar label says it provides 20% of the daily value for iron, that means it contributes 1/5, or 20%, of the total recommended daily intake for iron for the general population. This helps consumers identify foods that are high or low in certain nutrients at a glance. The daily value is derived from the DRI system, usually based on the recommended dietary allowance, RDA, or adequate intake, AI values. However, it is adapted for labeling purposes to represent the needs of most healthy individuals over the age of 4, regardless of gender and age. For nutrients like calcium or fiber, the DV reflects the minimum intake recommended for health. For nutrients we want to limit, like saturated fat or sodium, the DV reflects the upper limit of safe intake. The daily value is also the anchor for calculating percent daily value on food labels. This is how we categorize nutrients as low, moderate, or high. A food providing less than 5% of the daily value is considered to be low in that nutrient. Between 5 and 20% is moderate. Over 20% is high. And we'll go through the specifics of this in the food science module, module 6. The major takeaway in this video is this. Dietary reference intakes, the DRIs, are the full framework for nutrient recommendations. This includes AMDR for macronutrients and the RDA, EAR, AI, and UL for micronutrients. The daily values, or DV, are simplified public-facing numbers derived from these recommendations and are used on nutrition facts labels. DRIs are not just exam contents, they are the core nutritional framework used to establish safe, effective, and practical nutrient recommendations across nearly every level of nutrition science, healthcare, and public health systems.